It started as just another quiet evening in the Thompson household. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, and the hum of the television filled the living room as Jennifer Thompson absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone. She wasn't expecting anything unusual. Life had settled into a predictable routine ever since her husband passed away, leaving her and her 17-year-old son Ryan to navigate their days in a house that sometimes felt too big, too empty. But that night, something felt off. Ryan had been acting strange lately, more withdrawn, more secretive, his laughter replaced by long silences, his once open demeanor clouded by something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Jennifer had chalked it up to typical teenage mood swings, but deep down, an unsettling feeling had begun creeping in. And then she found it, the small, seemingly insignificant clue that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her son. It wasn't like she had been snooping. In fact, she hadn't meant to find anything at all. But as she was tidying up Ryan's room, something she rarely did anymore, since he always insisted on his privacy, her hand brushed against the corner of a notebook wedged beneath his mattress. She hesitated for only a second before pulling it out, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. It was old, worn, its pages slightly curled at the edges, but when she flipped it open, what she saw made her breath hitch. Ryan's handwriting filled the pages, but it wasn't the normal scribblings of a teenager. No notes about school, no random doodles, nothing light-hearted. Instead, it was something darker, detailed, sinister. Her fingers trembled as she turned each page, her mind struggling to process the chilling words in front of her. What had Ryan been hiding? And why did every word feel like a confession to something she wasn't ready to believe? The air in the room seemed to thicken as a cold realization settled over her. This wasn't just some angsty teenage journal. It was something else, something that hinted at secrets far bigger than she could have imagined. Secrets that made her stomach turn. Jennifer's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't ignore this. Whatever Ryan was hiding, whatever this notebook meant, she had to find out the truth. But as she stood there, clutching the notebook in her shaking hands, she had no idea that the truth was far darker than she could have ever imagined, and that by opening those pages, she had just stepped into a nightmare she might not be able to escape. Jennifer's mind spun as she stood in the dimly lit bedroom, the notebook heavy in her hands. A part of her wanted to believe it was nothing, just the overactive imagination of a teenager pouring his thoughts onto paper. But the words before her told a different story. They were too detailed, too raw, too unnervingly real. The handwriting she had once recognized as Ryan's careful scrawl had taken on an urgent, almost frantic quality in some places, as if the words had been scratched onto the pages in a moment of desperate confession. But confession of what? Jennifer's throat tightened as she scanned the entries, trying to make sense of the phrases that stood out like warnings. It wasn't supposed to happen. I can't stop thinking about it. If they find out, it's over. Every line sent a fresh wave of unease through her, but none of them offered the one thing she needed most answers. She thought back to last Friday night, the night that had first planted the seed of doubt in her mind. Ryan had come home late, long after he was supposed to, his clothes damp from the rain that had poured down all evening. He hadn't said much, just muttered something about a school project running late. But there was something off about him. His hands were shaking as he set his backpack down, his gaze darting around the room as if expecting someone to be watching. When she asked if he was okay, he had forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then, without another word, he had locked himself in his room for the rest of the night. Jennifer had dismissed it at the time, assuming he was just tired, stressed, maybe even upset over something trivial. But now that moment replayed in her mind with new meaning, as if it had been a warning she had failed to recognize. She flipped another page in the notebook, her breath catching, as she spotted a name one she recognized. Josh Carter. The name sent a chill through her. Josh had been Ryan's best friend for years, inseparable since middle school. They had spent countless weekends playing video games in their basement, riding their bikes around town, and getting into the kind of harmless trouble boys their age did. But something had shifted between them recently. Jennifer had noticed the absence of Josh's presence, more than anything else the sudden lack of visits, the missing laughter that used to echo through the house when the two boys were together. She had asked Ryan about it once, just a casual, offhand remark about how she hadn't seen Josh in a while, and his reaction had been strange. His expression had tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, before he forced out a dismissive, "We just don't hang out as much anymore." But now, seeing Josh's name scrawled in the middle of an ominous sentence, Jennifer's stomach twisted. "He knows," the entry read. "I don't know what to do if he says something." Her pulse pounded in her ears as she tried to make sense of it all. What did Josh know? And why did Ryan sound so afraid? The more she read, the deeper her unease grew. There were other names scattered throughout the pages, some she recognized, some she didn't. Teachers, classmates, even a reference to a local cop, Officer Dean. Nothing was written plainly, everything wrapped in vague insinuations and half-finished thoughts. But the underlying tone of panic was impossible to ignore. Jennifer's stomach churned as a terrifying thought crossed her mind. Had something happened? Something serious? Was Ryan in trouble? Or worse, had he done something? She shook her head, refusing to let her mind go to the darkest places just yet. She needed to be rational, needed to think clearly before jumping to conclusions. But as she turned the next page, her breath caught in her throat. A crude drawing, sketched in shaky lines, stared back at her. It was simple, just a rough outline of a house, but not just any house. Their house. And in the yard, drawn in jagged strokes of ink, was a single black figure standing by the back door. A shadowy presence, watching, waiting. Jennifer's hands trembled as she traced the ink with her fingertips. What did this mean? Who was it supposed to be? A sickening realization settled over her as she glanced toward the window, her reflection barely visible against the darkened glass. She wasn't sure if she was imagining it, but suddenly, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Jennifer's fingers tightened around the notebook as an uneasy chill crawled down her spine. The crude drawing of their house, the shadowy figure, lingering near the back door, it unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. She tried to shake it off, to convince herself that it was just the product of Ryan's imagination, but a nagging voice in the back of her mind wouldn't let it go. Something wasn't right. She needed to talk to him, to get answers, but she also knew she had to be careful. If Ryan was hiding something this serious, confronting him outright might only push him further away. For now, she decided to hold on to the notebook, tucking it into the top drawer of her nightstand, before heading downstairs to clear her head. The house was silent, too silent. It was late, but Jennifer wasn't tired anymore. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands still unsteady as she tried to piece everything together. She thought about calling someone, maybe one of Ryan's teachers, maybe even Josh's parents, but she didn't know what she would say. "Hey, I just found a disturbing notebook in my son's room, and I'm starting to think he's in serious trouble." It sounded ridiculous, paranoid, and yet every instinct she had was screaming at her that this wasn't just some teenage drama. There was something bigger at play. She took a slow sip of coffee, her mind racing, but before she could dwell on it any further, a soft noise caught her attention, a faint rustling sound coming from upstairs. Jennifer's heart slammed against her ribs. She set her cup down carefully, straining to hear. At first, there was only silence. Then, another sound, a muffled thump, like something being moved. Her body tensed. Ryan was supposed to be asleep, but something about this noise felt wrong. She stood slowly, her pulse hammering as she made her way toward the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the top, she hesitated outside Ryan's door. The house was still, the only sound her own breathing. But then, as she reached for the doorknob, another sound cut through the silence, a soft, almost inaudible creak coming from her own bedroom. Jennifer turned sharply, her stomach twisting. She had left her door open, the nightstand drawer slightly ajar, where she had placed the notebook just minutes ago. But now, as she stepped closer, something was different. The drawer was open wider than before, and the notebook was gone. Her breath caught in her throat as she frantically searched the nightstand, pulling out everything inside, but it was useless. The notebook had vanished. She spun around, scanning the room, her eyes darting to the window, the closet, the empty hallway. Someone had been in here. But who? Her mind reeled with possibilities, none of them comforting. She forced herself to think rationally. If Ryan had taken it, she would have heard his door open. He would have had to move past her to reach her room. No, this was different. This was someone else. A cold, unsettling realization settled over her. If someone had taken the notebook, it meant one of two things. Either Ryan wasn't the only one hiding something, or someone else knew what was in those pages and wanted to make sure she never saw it again. Jennifer's hands trembled as she backed toward the door, her instincts screaming at her to do something. But before she could even decide what that meant, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sudden noise made her jump, her nerves already on edge. When she picked it up, a single notification blinked on the screen. Unknown number, stop looking. Her breath hitched. The message was simple, just 2 words, but it sent a wave of panic crashing over her. Someone was watching. Someone knew she had found the notebook. And whoever they were, they didn't want her to keep digging. Jennifer's mind raced. This wasn't just about Ryan anymore. This was bigger than she had thought. Someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep this buried. But the worst part wasn't the missing notebook or the cryptic warning. It was the sinking feeling that crept into her gut, the terrifying thought she could no longer ignore. What if Ryan wasn't the one with the darkest secret? Jennifer's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the message on her phone, her fingers tightening around the device as if it might offer more answers if she held on long enough. Stop looking. 2 simple words, but they carried a weight that made her stomach churn. Someone was warning her, but who? And how did they know what she had found? Her thoughts raced as she turned toward Ryan's closed door, her mind battling with the worst possibilities. Could he have sent it himself, desperate to keep whatever he was hiding buried? Or was someone else involved, someone outside their home, someone watching? The thought made her skin crawl. She had spent the past few days worrying about Ryan's secrets, but now she had an even more terrifying realization. Someone else was pulling the strings, and they knew she was getting too close. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. The sound was unexpected, too late for visitors, too deliberate to ignore. Jennifer hesitated, her fingers hovering over her phone screen as she debated whether to call someone before answering. But before she could make a decision, another knock followed, firmer this time, impatient. She swallowed her fear and moved cautiously through the darkened hallway, every shadow in the house suddenly feeling like it was hiding something. When she reached the door, she hesitated for only a second before unlocking it and pulling it open. Standing on the porch, drenched from the misty night air, was Josh Carter. His hood was pulled up over his head, his clothes slightly damp, but it wasn't the rain that made Jennifer's stomach twist. It was the look in his eyes. There was something wild there, something frantic, as if he had run all the way to her house without stopping. He glanced past her, scanning the interior, as if expecting someone to be waiting inside before locking eyes with her. "Is Ryan here?" His voice was strained, barely above a whisper, but there was an urgency behind it that sent Jennifer's nerves into overdrive. "He's asleep," she said cautiously, studying the way Josh's hands clenched at his sides, his entire body wound tight. "What's going on?" Josh hesitated, shifting on his feet, his face pale in the dim light. He looked like he was debating whether or not to say what had brought him here, but something in his expression told Jennifer he had already made up his mind. "I got a text," he finally muttered, pulling his phone from his pocket and holding it out for her to see. Jennifer took it, her breath catching as she read the message. "You were there too. Stay quiet." A sick feeling settled deep in her gut. It was the same eerie warning, but this time it wasn't directed at her. It was meant for Josh. She looked up at him sharply, her pulse hammering. "What does this mean? What were you there for?" Josh shook his head, running a shaky hand through his wet hair. "I don't know, okay? I don't know who sent it. I don't know what they think I know. I don't know anything. But it's not just me, Mrs. Thompson. Ryan got one too." Jennifer's heart dropped. "What?" Josh nodded, his expression darkening. "Earlier tonight. He didn't tell me what it said, but I could tell it freaked him out. We were supposed to meet up, but he bailed at the last minute. When I asked him about it, he just told me to forget it. But now," he gestured toward his phone, his jaw tightening. "Now I'm starting to think something really bad happened." Jennifer's mind reeled. If Ryan had received a warning before she even found the notebook, it meant someone had been watching him too. But why? What had he and Josh been involved in? And why did someone think they knew something? Her thoughts were spinning in too many directions, each possibility worse than the last. She thought back to the names she had seen in Ryan's notebook, the scattered clues that had felt incomplete at the time. Could this be connected to one of them? Officer Dean, the cryptic notes about someone knowing, the drawing of their house, every piece of the puzzle, suddenly felt more sinister, more urgent. "Josh," she said carefully, lowering her voice, "did something happen that night?" The night Ryan came home late, soaked from the rain. She watched his reaction closely, the way his jaw clenched, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He looked away, exhaling sharply before shaking his head. "I don't know," he said again, but this time it didn't sound like the truth. Jennifer opened her mouth to press further, but before she could, another sound cut through the night, the faint, distant chime of a phone ringing. Josh's head snapped up, his expression darkening as he reached into his pocket. His fingers hovered over the screen before turning the device so Jennifer could see. Unknown number. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The ringing continued, the shrill sound drilling into Jennifer's nerves. Josh's grip on the phone tightened, his thumb hovering over the screen, as if he wasn't sure whether to answer. But then, without warning, the call ended. A second later, a new message appeared. "You're asking too many questions." Jennifer's stomach twisted into knots. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were listening. Jennifer felt her skin prickle as she stared at the message glowing on Josh's phone screen. The realization hit her all at once. This wasn't just about secrets anymore. It wasn't just about Ryan's odd behavior or a missing notebook. Someone was watching. Someone was listening. And whoever they were, they had already decided that Jennifer and Josh were getting too close to the truth. A suffocating fear settled over her, tightening around her ribs as she tried to grasp the full weight of what was happening. Josh was still gripping his phone, his knuckles turning white as his breathing grew uneven. He looked shaken in a way she hadn't seen before, as if the reality of this situation was only now truly hitting him. "This is messed up," he muttered, his voice low and unsteady. "Who even does something like this?" He turned sharply toward Jennifer, his expression raw with fear. "Mrs. Thompson, what if this isn't just some prank? What if we're actually in danger?" Jennifer's mind was already spiraling down that same terrifying path. She had spent the past few hours trying to convince herself that this was just some tangled mess of teenage drama, but deep down, she had known better. And now, as the weight of Josh's words settled over her, she realized there was no pretending anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an overreaction. Someone was trying to silence them. The air in the house felt heavier now, the walls too close, the shadows stretching too far. She suddenly felt the urge to check on Ryan, to make sure he was still safe, still here. Without another word, she turned and hurried up the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs with every step. Josh followed close behind, his breath uneven as he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he expected someone to appear out of the darkness. When they reached Ryan's door, Jennifer hesitated only a second before twisting the knob and pushing it open. The room was empty. Jennifer's stomach dropped. The bed was still unmade, the blanket thrown haphazardly to one side, but Ryan was nowhere to be seen. His phone, which was usually plugged in on his nightstand, was gone. The window was shut, but the blinds were slightly askew, as if they had been moved recently. Panic gripped her throat. "Ryan?" she called, but the silence that answered made her blood run cold. Josh took a step closer, his face draining of color. "No way," he whispered. He was just here. Jennifer's pulse thundered in her ears as she spun toward Josh. "Did he say anything to you before you came here? Anything about leaving? About meeting someone?" Josh shook his head, his expression clouded with confusion and fear. "No, he just seemed freaked out. But if he left, why wouldn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he tell you?" Jennifer felt the panic building, threatening to consume her. Ryan wouldn't just disappear like this, not in the middle of the night, not after everything that had happened. Unless he hadn't left on his own. The thought sent a violent shudder through her. She grabbed her own phone with trembling hands, quickly pulling up Ryan's number and hitting call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. A wave of nausea rolled through her. Her son was gone, and she had no idea where he was. Josh suddenly inhaled sharply, his eyes locked on something behind her. Jennifer turned just as he pointed toward Ryan's bed. There, lying partially tucked beneath his crumpled blanket, was a single folded sheet of paper. Jennifer's hands shook as she snatched it up, unfolding it with a growing sense of dread. The message was scrawled in rushed, uneven handwriting, Ryan's handwriting. "I had to go. Don't call. Don't look for me. It's not safe." Jennifer's breath left her in a sharp, painful exhale. The words blurred in her vision as she gripped the paper, her fingers digging into the edges as if holding onto it would somehow anchor her back to reality. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Josh's voice broke through the silence, hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't think he wrote that on his own." Jennifer looked at him, her pulse thundering in her ears. "What are you saying?" Josh swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the note. "Ryan's handwriting. It's shaky, like he was rushed. Or scared. But it's the wording. It's not safe. That doesn't sound like him." He hesitated, his voice dropping even lower. "It sounds like someone made him write it." The words sent an icy chill down Jennifer's spine. She clutched the note, her mind spinning with 100 terrifying possibilities. If Ryan hadn't written this willingly, then someone had forced him. And if someone had forced him, he was in serious danger. The air in the room suddenly felt suffocating, like the walls were pressing in on her. She didn't know who to call, where to start, what to do. Every instinct told her to run, to scream, to fight, but against what? Against who? Then, before she could even process her next move, her phone buzzed in her hand. She jolted, her nerves stretched too thin, her heart already hammering from fear. She looked down, expecting another unknown number, another warning. But this time, the name flashing across the screen made her blood run cold. Officer Dean. Jennifer's fingers hovered over the screen, her mind a whirlwind of panic and uncertainty. Ryan had written his name in that notebook. He was part of whatever this was. And now, in the middle of the night, just as Ryan had disappeared, he was calling. She didn't know what scared her more, the fact that he was calling now, or the sinking feeling that he already knew. Jennifer's hands trembled as she stared at the glowing name on her phone screen. Officer Dean. The name that had been scrawled in Ryan's notebook, the name that had been gnawing at the edges of her mind ever since she discovered it. The man who, until now, she had always assumed was nothing more than a well-meaning presence in town. But now, with Ryan missing and a warning that had been anything but subtle, this call felt different. More than just coincidence. Something inside her screamed not to answer. But if she let it go to voicemail, what then? Could she afford not to hear what he had to say? With a deep breath, she pressed the call button, lifting the phone to her ear. Jennifer, Officer Dean's voice came through, low and unreadable, but there was something off in his tone, something not quite right. Is Ryan home? Jennifer's blood ran cold. He didn't sound like a concerned officer, like someone checking in. He sounded like someone who already knew the answer. She forced herself to stay calm. Why are you asking? Her voice didn't shake, but she could feel the tension winding around her ribs, tightening with every second of silence that followed. A pause. Then, I need you to listen very carefully. His voice had dropped, turning into something heavier, something measured. You don't have a lot of time. Jennifer's grip tightened on the phone. Across the room, Josh was watching her, his own fear mirrored in his wide eyes. What do you mean? Where is my son? Officer Dean hesitated, as if debating how much to say. And then, finally, he exhaled. I need you to come meet me. Alone. No police, no questions. I can explain everything, but not over the phone. There are things you don't know. Things that Ryan might have already figured out. Another beat of silence. Then, his voice turned sharp, urgent. But you have to hurry, Jennifer. Because if they get to him first. The call cut out. Jennifer's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat, as she pulled the phone away, staring at the dark screen like it might offer more answers. They. Who the hell was they? And why would an officer of the law be warning her like this, off the record, in the middle of the night? The panic that had already been clawing at her suddenly sharpened into something deeper, something far more dangerous. Josh stood frozen near the doorway, his face pale. Mrs. Thompson, this is bad. Jennifer barely heard him. Her mind was racing, sifting through every detail, every interaction, every clue. Officer Dean had been a familiar figure in town for years, always quick with a reassuring smile, always there in the background. But Ryan had written his name in that notebook for a reason. And if this man knew something, if he was warning her instead of filing a report, it meant there was something bigger happening here. Something she wasn't supposed to know. And then, like a cracking glass, a memory surfaced, something she had nearly overlooked. The night Ryan had come home, soaking wet, shaking, barely able to meet her eyes. The night everything had started. He had been clutching something, something small and dark. She had thought it was his phone, but no. No, now that she was thinking back, it hadn't been. It had been something else. Something he had taken. Her stomach turned violently. A clue. He had stolen something, and whatever it was, it had been important enough to make him a target. Josh took a slow step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Thompson. What if he wasn't just scared that night? What if he saw something he wasn't supposed to? Jennifer's entire body went cold. She suddenly remembered the security camera footage, Ryan's paranoia about being watched. And then, the warning text. You were there too. Stay quiet. Not just Ryan. Josh too. Whatever had happened that night, whatever Ryan had taken or witnessed, he wasn't the only one in danger. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Ryan hadn't just disappeared. Someone had come for him. And she was next. Jennifer's mind raced, tangled in a web of panic and fear as the weight of everything crashed down on her. Ryan was missing. Officer Dean's cryptic warning had only made things worse. And now, she was left standing in the middle of her son's empty bedroom, grasping at puzzle pieces that refused to fit together. She couldn't breathe. The walls felt too close. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to something terrible. But the worst part, she had no idea where to go from here. Who to trust? What to believe? Josh was still there, staring at her, waiting for her to say something, to make sense of what was happening, but she had nothing. Just fear. Just uncertainty. Then, the phone buzzed in her hand again. Her heart lurched as she glanced down, expecting another unknown number, another warning. But instead, it was a name she knew. Greg. Her ex-husband. Ryan's father. The man who had been absent for most of their son's life, but suddenly, inexplicably, had started reaching out in the past few weeks. Her stomach twisted. She had ignored his calls before, assuming he was just making another half-hearted attempt at reconnecting. But now, she wasn't so sure. She answered, her voice tight. Greg? There was a pause. Then, his voice came through, tense and urgent. Jennifer, listen to me. I know what's happening. You need to get out of the house. Right now. A cold dread shot through her veins. What? No time to explain, Greg snapped. You're in danger. They're watching you. Her grip on the phone tightened as she spun toward the window, her pulse hammering. The blinds were still slightly askew from when she had checked them earlier. Outside, the street looked empty, but suddenly she wasn't so sure. Her skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes. Greg, where's Ryan? Do you know where he is? A beat of silence. Then, Greg exhaled, something breaking in his voice. They have him. Jennifer's stomach dropped. The world seemed to tilt. Who? Who has him? I can't say over the phone, Greg said quickly, his words clipped and urgent. But I know how to get him back. You need to come to me alone. And you need to do it now. Jennifer's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Everything inside her screamed no. This was Greg, the man who had walked away from them years ago, the man who had never been there when Ryan needed him. Now suddenly, she was supposed to trust him, follow his orders like he hadn't abandoned them. But then again, Ryan had started acting strange right around the time Greg came back into his life. Could he have been involved all along? Was this a trap? Or was Greg really the only person who knew the truth? Unknown number. Tick-tock, Jennifer. One wrong move and you'll never see your son again. Jennifer sucked in a sharp breath. Her vision blurred for a moment, her body swaying under the crushing weight of it all. She had no good options. No clear path. Every road was. Jennifer's entire body went numb as she stared at the message on her screen, her heartbeat a deafening drum in her ears. The walls of her world, already fragile and crumbling, suddenly felt like they were closing in, suffocating her under the weight of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Tick-tock. The words pulsed in her mind, a taunt, a warning, a promise of something far worse if she hesitated. This wasn't just about Ryan anymore. This wasn't just a random disappearance, a mistake, a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was planned, calculated, bigger than anything she had thought before. She turned to Josh, his face pale under the dim light, his eyes wide with fear. He had seen the text too. He didn't say anything, but she could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down just as heavily as hers. She needed to move. Now. But where? To Greg? To Officer Dean? To the police, if they could even be trusted at this point? Every instinct inside her screamed that this went beyond what she had thought. This wasn't just about Ryan finding a clue he shouldn't have. This was about who had put that clue there in the first place. Her stomach twisted violently as a realization clawed its way to the surface. The security footage, the missing notebook pages, the way Ryan had been acting before he vanished. He hadn't just stumbled onto something by accident. He had been looking for something. He had known, at least in part, that there was something bigger happening here. And he had been afraid, not just of what he found, but of who might be watching him. And then another memory slammed into her, hitting her so hard she staggered back. The night Ryan had come home shaking, drenched, barely able to speak. He had told her nothing, brushed it off, said he was fine. But she had seen the way he kept checking his phone. Waiting. Expecting something. At the time, she had assumed it was just a teenage boy being secretive. But what if it hadn't been? What if he had been waiting for someone to reach out? What if he had been looking for a way out? A sickening wave of realization crashed over her. Ryan hadn't just been scared. He had been trying to protect her. And then, before she could process it further, the front door rattled. Jennifer froze, every muscle locking into place, her breath catching in her throat. The doorknob twisted once, twice, slowly, deliberately. Josh's eyes widened, and in an instant she grabbed his arm, yanking him back, pressing a single shaking finger to her lips. Not a sound. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, a voice. Low, calm, terrifying in its steadiness. Jennifer. Her stomach clenched. Officer Dean. Her pulse thundered, panic rising fast and hard. This wasn't right. Not now. Not after everything. He had told her to meet him alone. Not to come here. Not to show up at her door in the dead of night. Something was wrong. So wrong. I know you're in there, Dean continued, his voice unshaken, his tone edged with something unreadable. Open the door. We need to talk. Jennifer's hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. Everything in her screamed not to move, not to breathe. But she wasn't sure how long she could hold out. How long before he forced his way in. And then another buzz from her phone. Another text. Her stomach dropped as she glanced down. Unknown number. If you open that door, you'll never see Ryan again. Terror exploded inside her. Her hands shook violently as she turned her gaze back toward the door, heart hammering so hard it hurt. She had thought she was trapped before. Now she knew she was. Jennifer's breath was shallow, her pulse hammering so violently she thought it might give her away. Her grip on Josh's wrist tightened, her mind screaming for clarity, for a way out of this nightmare. Officer Dean stood on the other side of the door, patient, waiting. He wasn't banging, wasn't forcing his way in, but that was what made it so much worse. He knew she was here, knew she was trapped, and that meant this was a game to him. A slow, deliberate game of control. The weight of those words crashed down on her like a landslide, choking the breath from her lungs. Who was this? How did they know? And most importantly, could she trust them? Every choice felt like a trap. If she opened that door, she was putting herself and Josh in immediate danger. But if she stayed hidden, if she ignored Dean completely, what then? He was an officer of the law. He had power, influence, the resources to make things disappear, to make people disappear. And then, just as the seconds ticked away, just as the tension became unbearable, something shifted outside. The faintest crunch of gravel. A second presence. A new shadow flickering against the window. Jennifer's stomach twisted. There was someone else out there. Dean's voice dropped lower, more urgent. Jennifer, don't make this harder than it has to be. We're past that now. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something chillingly final in his tone. Ryan wouldn't want this. A sharp, jagged breath ripped from her throat. Ryan. His name on Dean's lips made her sick, made her hands tremble with rage and fear. Because she knew now. Dean wasn't here to help her. He was here to shut her up, to erase the last loose end before the truth could surface. And for the first time, she realized just how deep this went. She pressed back against the wall, her brain screaming through the fog of panic, searching for something, anything. A weapon, an escape route, a plan. But then, before she could move, before she could even process her next step, a deafening bang shattered the silence. The door was kicked open so hard, it nearly flew off its hinges, slamming into the wall with a sickening crack. Josh barely had time to stifle a yelp before Jennifer yanked him back, shoving him behind her as Officer Dean stormed inside, his silhouette cutting a dark figure against the dim glow of the streetlights behind him. His eyes were sharp, cold, determined. "No more games," he muttered, stepping forward. "No more running." Jennifer's body went rigid, her heart a violent drum against her ribs. She needed to move, to fight, to do something. But then, in that split second, before Dean could reach her, a second gunshot rang out. Dean's body jerked violently, his face twisting in shock as he staggered, his hand flying to his side. Blood bloomed across his shirt, dark and thick, and for the first time, his mask of confidence cracked. He turned, struggling to process what had just happened, and that's when Jennifer saw him. Greg, her ex-husband, stood in the doorway, gun still raised, his face pale but steady, eyes locked onto Dean, with a fire she had never seen before. "Step away from her," Greg ordered, voice low, controlled, but there was no mistaking the warning beneath it. Dean let out a slow, shuddering breath, his hand pressing against his wound as he gave a small, bitter chuckle. "You really don't get it, do you?" His gaze flickered to Jennifer, something almost resembling pity in his eyes. "This doesn't end with me." Jennifer's stomach churned, because she knew, even before Greg stepped closer, before the weight of the moment could settle, Dean wasn't lying. This wasn't just him. It never had been. Ryan had uncovered something bigger, something that had sent a ripple through an entire network of people who had been operating in the shadows for far too long. The words burned into her mind, twisting like a knife in her gut, because she knew. Dean had been right. He was just the beginning. This wasn't about him. It had never been about him. Ryan had stumbled onto something far bigger, something powerful enough that people were willing to kill to keep it buried. And whoever had sent that message, they were still out there, watching, waiting. A strained groan pulled her attention back to Dean, who let out a weak, bitter laugh as his head lolled back against the wall. His face was pale, sweat glistening along his forehead, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were still filled with something unsettling. Not fear, not regret. Resignation. "You think this is a victory?" He rasped, the corners of his mouth twitching into something that almost resembled a smirk. "You have no idea what you're up against." Jennifer's stomach twisted, a sickening chill crawling down her spine. She wanted to scream at him, demand answers, shake the truth out of him before he slipped away. But she didn't get the chance. Outside, the sound of sirens suddenly split through the night. Red and blue lights flashed against the darkened street, growing brighter, closer. Someone had called them, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone else. It didn't matter. What mattered was that help was coming, but so were questions. Explanations. Lies tangled in truth, waiting to be unraveled. And worst of all, Jennifer still didn't know where Ryan was. Greg lowered the gun, exhaling a shaky breath as he met her gaze. "We need to go," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Now."